Just a poor kid from the east side who's got something to prove.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Colton Ogburn, and these are all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in The Penguin, Episode 6. Guys, this series just keeps getting better and better, and despite Penguin already being an established villain in the Batman, it's becoming clear that this series is really an origin story showcasing Oz's transition from a lower-level criminal into a full-blown crime lord.
You know my reputation?
Yeah, I do. Do you?
Oz's hands were relatively clean prior to this series. Again, relatively. He was of course a criminal who had done horrible things, but this series, especially the previous episode, has shown Oz really crossing that line from bad to just damn near evil. He's committing truly heinous acts that make us as the audience, perhaps former Oz sympathizers, watch him descend into a worthy foe of the Bat among the likes of the Joker and the Riddler. Oz's descent into a metaphorical hell has been on full display, both literally and figuratively. This entire series is all about the underbelly of Gotham, Oz operating in the depths of the city. In the previous episode, we saw him bask in the flames of the burning Maronis, and then descend further down into the depths of Gotham with his new underground facility. Okay, so now let's break down this episode.
I mean, Sophia's the last of them. She don't even like a name.
So since Oz's betrayal, Sophia has been on a warpath of making her own name, distancing herself from the Falcons, and embracing her new self, Sophia Gigante, which, as we mentioned last week, is her actual name from the comics, and in this series, it is the maiden name of her mother. Now, in the previous episode, we saw Sophia correct Bach, saying,
"Please, I prefer Sophia."
And one of her final lines in that episode was even,
"The Falcons don't exist anymore."
So oftentimes the opening shots of this show are overpasses, and we can see the crime happening beneath that line. This is symbolic of the literal Gotham underworld, the dividing line between the poor and the elite. We even saw this brilliantly portrayed by the flood lines on the buildings in Crown Point, once again reminding us how the flood greatly impacted the poor and working class, while the rich up in their ivory towers were mostly spared. Once again playing into the overarching theme of not only this series, but Matt Reeves' Batman universe as a whole, class disparity. But in this opening shot, we're not only under an overpass, we are going below ground into literally the deepest part of Gotham. We're reaching a level of evil previously unseen. Now, Vic driving into the Penguin's lair is the same framing and camera work as Bruce Wayne going into the Batcave in The Batman. This is yet another representation of our character's descent into hell. We're seeing a good kid like Vic fall further and further into the darkness that has infected Gotham City. This imagery of Vic going into Oz's lair juxtaposed with Bruce Wayne descending into his Batcave reminds us that Batman also lives in a hell of his own. His pain, his grief, his guilt, they're all haunting Bruce, and they are the very things that created and fuel the Dark Knight. The darkness swelling in the belly of Gotham infects every Gotham resident, but the way it affects the individual can differ. Penguin and Vic have fallen into the more common path of crime, while Batman has taken this exact same torture and uses it to combat the darkness by embracing those inner demons in a far different way than Oz. But we also have to remember that unlike Vic and Oz, Bruce comes from a place of privilege, actually kind of similar to Sophia. Yes, Bruce has suffered great loss, but he's never wondered where his next meal would come from or where he'd be laying his head that night. Bruce was only able to avoid Gotham's corruption because he was given a head start in life. He's never been under that literal and metaphorical waterline, gasping for air and just trying to keep his head above water. Oz and Vic, however, are drowning and trying to swim to the top, while Bruce, more specifically the Batman, has dove from the heights of Gotham's elite down into the depths, hoping to pull that metaphorical drain stopper and save Gotham City from itself. And this is consistent with every iteration of Batman. The same social conditions of Gotham City that create Batman's greatest foes are the same conditions that created the Bat himself. So here the maps in the background are really similar to the section maps in the No Man's Land comic, where Oracle divided up Gotham by gangs. Oracle, of course, being the alias that Barbara Gordon takes on after being shot by the Joker in the Killing Joke comic, and she essentially becomes an informant for Batman. Now, here we can see that the Odessa mob is marked uptown on the map, and as we've gone over previously, the Odessa mob, they're a Russian mob in Gotham who are ruthless drug pushers, and they were heavily involved in the Great Gang War during Batman War Games. That's the comic that this episode is most heavily referencing. Now, Burnley Town Massive, aka the BTM, was another gang operating in Gotham in the town of Burnley. They also appeared briefly in the War Games arc, but were actually taken out by the aforementioned Odessa mob. This once again reminds us of the gang war going on in a show like The Penguin. Now, Oz then mentions the Low Boys, who are actually a smaller gang from the Batman No Man's Land comic. They have a rivalry with the gang Street Demons in that comic, both fighting for more land to claim in the post-earthquake Gotham. We've talked before how in the Batman we didn't get an earthquake, but we did get the Riddler's Flood, which we think is setting up for a No Man's Land type adaptation in the Batman 2. Now, Oz also mentions the Triads, who we did meet in episode 3. They're a Chinese criminal organization from the comics, and there's two prominent branches in Gotham. The Neon Dragons, who we heard mention of in episode 3.
I can go to the Neon Dragons or the Odessa mob.
And the Lucky Hand Triad, who were the more involved party in the War Games arc. The group additionally had an alliance with the BTM against the Odessa mob. So Oz's worker Zeke says,
The City Hall's rationing electricity, sending it all to the rich neighborhoods.
and that goes hand in hand with all of the other help, or lack thereof, that comes to Crown Point. Now, in the previous episode, Oz mentioned how the politicians got greedy and diverted funds, thus cutting off the trolley.
They were banned when I was a kid. Politicians got greedy, divided funds.
Even prior to the flooding, this area of Gotham has been left to its own devices without any hope of help. Oz says,
They're so busy with their noses up, they'll never take the look down.
I really love this line because this episode and this series as a whole is all about status and where you come from, and how those economic differences can drastically affect the outcome of your life and your overall outlook on life. Sophia is filthy rich. Having her nose turned up signifies snobbiness, and this alludes to how Sophia will be too busy with her affluent world that she won't see the little guys like Oz and Vic who are taking her on from below, literally from below. Oz tells Vic,
We got the loyalty, we got the love.
now these are the two most important things to Oz. Everything Oz does is in the name of love. Whether it's genuine or not doesn't really matter, as long as he feels validated and that the people he surrounds himself with are loyal. Sophia even makes fun of Oz later in the episode when she mockingly calls him
The best you've ever had.
So Oz is happy that he is the guy in the neighborhood who takes care of people, because that's exactly what Rex Calabrese was for him.
He helped people. If someone in your family was sick, you find you a doctor.
He was that guy in Oz's neighborhood, and Oz sees just how close he is to becoming just like his childhood hero. Oz tells Vic,
They're gonna tell stories about us one day, kid.
now last episode Oz told Vic that it was you and me till the end, and while it's nice that he's continuing with that rhetoric, we know just how fast Oz can turn on those that he cares about. Now, this whole scene is happening in the mixed dining / war room. Here we're seeing that Sophia is already conflating the family room with her less than holy work life. But now she's adding her love life in as well. The blending of both her professional and personal life highlights Sophia's blurred boundaries. She doesn't know where family fits in or where a healthy relationship fits in. Everything she's learned in life has been at this war table. Sophia has allowed herself to become this hangman facade that Carmine created, and she could be on the path to becoming just like her father. Now, it's also worth mentioning that in the previous episode, when Sophia was making her debut as the Don Gigante, the family portrait was removed from the room, but now it's back. It's almost as though Sophia wanted any reminder of Carmine Falcone out of the room until everyone understood that he would not be the focal point of their lives or that portrait from that point forward. Here we see that Sophia has a Kahlo book on the coffee table. Frida Kahlo is hailed as a feminist icon. Her work explores themes of personal identity and gender roles. This makes perfect sense for Sophia's character because Sofia Gigante was born from years and years of being forced into a perfect Falcone. She hid who she truly was at the behest of all the men surrounding her. Kahlo's work encapsulates everything that Sophia is now standing for, albeit in a more twisted fashion. Now, when we see Sal in the kitchen cooking, this is meant to serve as a metaphor for love. Cooking involves care of some level, and the time that you spend preparing the meal can symbolize the time invested in a loved one. Now, Sal cooking this food shows that he is willing to put in time and effort in whatever sort of partnership he now has with Sophia. Now, put that in contrast to where we saw Carmine in episode 4. He wasn't cooking the food at the table, it was prepared. This shows us the passive relationship he really had with Sophia. It was artificial, it didn't come from love. He wasn't willing to put in that time, it was all showmanship presented for the family. And we're now seeing that contrasted with Sal, who is taking on the role of a father for Sophia, and Sophia is filling that void left behind from Sal's wife and son. Now, Sal also shares a glass of wine with Sophia, just like Carmine did the night before he betrayed her. This could be meant to show that Sal is different and won't turn his back on Sophia. Sal has a certain sense of loyalty and a code that he sticks to, but if this show has taught us anything, always expect to have your back stabbed.
At 2, work friend?
Now, Sophia asks Sal if he needs help cooking.
Do you want this chopped?
Now, like we said, cooking is a metaphor for love, but cooking together? Not only is that showing love on some level, but it shows teamwork, trust, and communication. Sophia and Sal are able to relate and then connect. They both lost their families, and it really is the two of them against the world at this point, and they're helping one another move forward and against Oz. Now, at this point, it's difficult to pinpoint who exactly the villain is of this series when they're all so bad, yet simultaneously sympathetic. So Sal calls Oz.
So the weed is sneaking around the city.
Which is hilarious because Oz's operation is literally growing up from the underground and spreading throughout the city like a weed. Sophia says that Oz likes the spotlight too much to stay hidden, and she's right on the money. We saw it clear as day in the last episode with Oz telling his hitman to say,
This is from Oz, motherfucker.
he can't help but advertise himself regardless of the trouble it could get him in. Remember, Oz revered Rex because he was a big deal. Oz wants the same amount of eyes on him that were on Rex, and he won't stop until he gets that big parade thrown in his honor. Now, Sal tells Sophia that he planned to pass the recipe down to Taj, showing that he really saw his family as just that, family. He didn't look at his son or his wife as pawns in the gang war. He planned to pass a loved family meal to his son. Now, contrast that to Carmine, who only planned on the future of the family business. He didn't care about Sophia or Alberto as his children, but just as future heirs. Now, here we can see them eating in the kitchen instead of the war room. Now, dinners with Carmine always had ulterior motives. The one dinner we saw ended up with them just talking about the family work. Meanwhile, this dinner with Sal only ended up with them talking about work as a way to get away from the pain of an actual dinner conversation. Additionally, Sal and Sophia are sitting next to one another. Neither of them are at the head of the table like Carmine always was. Sal and Sophia are genuine partners in this collaboration.
Kind of reminds me of Paulie's Diner, don't it, Ma?
Now, Polly's Diner is actually from the game Arkham Knight. The name is a reference to the legendary Batman writer Paul Dini. Now, here we can see bodies hanging just like in the Dark Victory comic run, but now missing pinkies. This is an homage to Oz's handling of Alberto earlier this season. And this mixes the origins of the Hangman in the comics with the origin of Sofia Gigante in this show. Remember, in the comics, Sophia received her father's pinky with a ring on it in the mail, but in this show, she received her brother's body missing his pinky and his ring. Now, Sophia in the comics went after everyone related to Harvey Dent in the case against her father, picking them off one by one until she got to Harvey. And she's doing that here as well, starting with the little guys. The Hangman is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point. She didn't intend to be the Hangman, but she was framed, and in the end, the rumors will be proven true. Now, Oz says that the people of Gotham need to know that Bliss is in their hood. At this point, everyone knows Oz is the only person selling Bliss, and this is exactly what Sophia was talking about earlier. Oz likes the spotlight too much, regardless of the bad attention that it can gain him. Now, here we can see Oz's bookshelf is chock full of useless magazines and seemingly unread books. His whole apartment, like everything about him, is an act. He's putting on a show of rich and glamorous, but those who truly are rich and glamorous can see right through him. Now, when Sal turns on the fireplace, we hear Sophia say,
I know.
showing that the two were clearly thinking the same thing about his place being tacky. This is yet another reminder at how elites like Sophia and Sal look down on men like Oz who come from nothing. Or more importantly, they aren't looking down, they're looking up, and that's another example of them turning their noses up and remaining blind to Oz's actions below, which I'm assuming he will eventually win this ultimate war because he was able to operate in that underbelly that Sophia and Sal just can't bring themselves down to.
He takes everything from me, and he's got nothing.
Now, this is the gist of Oz's relationship with everyone in this show. His mother even says so a scene later.
I have given you everything. I have given you everything.
Now, as much as Oz is a bad person, this comes from him growing up with nothing. If you're born with nothing, you're always going to be afraid that you'll die with nothing too. Oz grasps for everything he can get so that he can ensure he doesn't wind up right back where he started. Now, the song playing here is Put the Blame on Mame, the same song that we heard in episode 1 with Oz and Vic watching. Like we said in our episode 1 breakdown, this song was written for the classic noir film Gilda, which Oz references a second later.
You look gorgeous, Ma. Like Gilda.
Now, this song blames Mame for the 3 catastrophic events in US history, as well as the fictional shooting of Dan McGrew. Like Oz says in that episode,
She's just a scapegoat.
now Oz asks Haiti, you don't want to be pals? And this is a reference to his blackmail letter to Haiti that he sent in episode 1 when he wrote the Let's Be Pals on the cover of that blackmail envelope. Now, both he and the Riddler have the same sentiment. They're both villains spawned out of poverty. They're trying to literally fight the system in the worst way possible. However, both of their fatal flaws are themselves. Riddler garnering a cult following and becoming an icon, and the Penguin solely helping the people of Crown Point to reach his end goal of being this small town hero. Both of these villains have genuine heart behind their anger towards the rich elite, but their selfish and nihilistic ways get in the way of anyone being able to sympathize with what they're preaching. Now, Sophia does have a moment here that reminded me of the Killing Joke comic, knocking on the door with her gun drawn, just like we saw the Joker do with Barbara Gordon. And hey, this isn't the only Joker moment that Sophia has in this episode, but more on that in just a bit. And hey, everyone, while I have you, did you know that ScreenCrush is coming live to a city near you? Come meet me, Ryan, and the gang live and in person.
Well, what happens at a live show anyways?
Oh man, we're going to show things that they won't let us show here on YouTube, and we're going to have nerdy debates like, for instance, I like Joker too.
What the is this? Are you kidding me?
We're also going to have special guests, exclusive videos and merch, trivia, but most importantly, I want to see you guys live and in person. We did a live show back in February, and it was so much fun just to be surrounded by our fellow nerds.
Oh yeah. Is it going to be like a mini Comic-Con?
Exactly! So the full list of tickets and dates are in the description below. Our next show is on November 14th in Boston, Massachusetts, so buy tickets now before we sell out. Also, feel free to check out our merch store, ScreenCrushMerch.com, where we have lots of fun nerddom-inspired shirts. Now, back to the Penguin. So, next we hear...
You were born into opportunity, honey, so you can afford to think in black and white.
Matt Reeves' whole Batman crime saga is based on class warfare and the wealth disparity in Gotham. This episode is about how status in life pushes you toward what choices you make. Eve understands Oz because they both come from poorer areas and understand what it means to be the little guy. But she understands Sophia as well because they're both women, and no matter how wealthy or poor you are, you'll always be overlooked for being a woman. Eve asks Sophia,
That's not who you are, right?
and the score in this scene is really interesting. It has identical notes to the Riddler score, but it fades into the Batman score.
Well, whatever I was born into.
Almost as though we're seeing the real-time struggle of Sophia deciding if she's the hero or the villain. And I wanted to take a second to talk about how much I love the fact that Oz brought beers to his meeting with these other gangsters. Earlier in the episode, we saw Sophia and Sal sharing a glass of wine. Them sharing a glass of wine is meant to symbolize how they are more elite and fancy, while we see Oz cracking open some beers with his new partners, once again giving us the imagery that Oz is coming from a lower financial status and is more of a working man. Now, the man representing the BTM gang is Abel Crown. Abel is the leader of the gang in the comics as well, first appearing in Detective Comics issue 744. We then have the Sullivan crime family. Donnie Boy Sullivan is the one representing them, and they are from the Long Halloween comic run, and they were associates of the Falcones. In the Long Halloween, they're the ones responsible for a failed hit on Harvey Dent, and eventually they're all taken out by Alberto Falcone. Next, we have mention of the Elliott Bridge, named after the Elliott family in Gotham. In the Batman, Edward Elliot, is the award-winning investigative reporter that broke the story about the Waynes, and he was then murdered by Carmine. In the comics, the Elliots come from a line of wealth and are up there with the Waynes when it comes to money status. The Batman character shares a name with the great-grandfather of Thomas Elliot, aka Hush. Hush, of course, being another iconic Batman villain that we have theorized could be the villain of the Batman 2. Now, next we hear Oz mention Gold Summit, which is the title of the episode. And this is their Gold Summit, gathering all of the gangs in Gotham to further their way to the top. Their summit on how to get their gold. Oz opens up about his crimes, mirroring Sophia talking about the family death in the last episode.
I popped Alberto Falcone.
Now, Oz does get the power back on in Crown Point, and I like that they're playing with comic lore like a puzzle. In the second half of the War Games arc in the comics, Oz causes a blackout in Gotham in order to monopolize power. But here we see the exact opposite of that. He's giving out energy only in return for loyalty and respect. And then we end the episode with Sophia finding Oz's mom and clutching a crowbar. This could perhaps be another Joker reference, with a crowbar being a common weapon of the Clown Prince of Crime. In the comics, we saw Joker beat Robin to death with a crowbar, taking from Bruce the person he cared most about. Oz's mother is the person that he cares most about, apart from himself, but he also cares a lot about Vic, who we've said before in a previous breakdown that in many ways Vic is the Robin to Penguin's Batman. The parallels are actually pretty interesting. He's a troubled orphan that Oz takes in under his wing and trains in his line of work, just like Batman did for Robin. So Sophia taking away Oz's mom and then maybe even Vic would break Oz, or it could be the final push he'll need to become one of Batman's greatest foes. We have to remember that we are getting the Batman 2, and the Penguin is probably going to be a really big character in that film, as well as probably a third Batman film. So, like I said earlier, I think we are seeing the origins of Oz Cobblepot, or Oz Cobb, really beginning to break bad and become this notorious Batman villain. In the Batman, the Penguin is more of a side character, and while he's great, don't get me wrong, he's not really fully living up to that full grandiose feeling that the Penguin has in the comics. But I think that's the point of this series. We are seeing Oz become the Penguin. It's an origin story for the Penguin, so he can be a truly formidable foe in future Batman films. Well, guys, those are all the Easter eggs we caught in this episode. Let us know if we missed any down in the comments below. I want to give a huge shout out to my co-writer on this episode, Lee Mazzio. If you're new here, please feel free to subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Colton Ogburn.